Alrighty, hi everyone. Thanks so much for attending our how-to session. My name's Sydney Johnson. I am a board member with Guerrilla Cartography. I'm here with Darin Jensen and Nick Reale, and we're going to tell you a bit about one of our recent projects called Atlas in a Day. And we're going to get started with just a little bit of background, a little bit more about what we are, kind of before we dive into that. So hang tight, and Darin, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm Darin Jensen, and I am one of the founders of Guerrilla Cartography, and I just want to share a brief history of how we got started and what our aims are in building community through cartography. So I had been teaching cartography at UC Berkeley for several years and had probably made scores of maps for other books, for academic books, for novels, all kinds of cartography for the printed volume. And it occurred to me that books take too long to publish. And I wondered why that was. And I wondered if we could actually make a really amazing atlas in a much shorter time than the 2, 3, 5 years that I've seen so many books take. So working with many of my students and people outside of Berkeley, got this idea to crowdsource an atlas, and seemed like choosing a theme would be a great way to approach that. So we settled on food. And this was again in the summer of 2012 in June. And so Molly and I worked together to come up with a plan of reaching out. How would we collect the maps? What would we do for editing? And how would we fund publishing such a thing? And we settled on crowdfunding to go with our crowdsourcing. And we used Kickstarter as our platform. So Food and Atlas was born in June of 2012, and in January of 2013 we had a printed volume. And so I'm going to just show a couple of the maps because I think it's just fun to look back and let you see what we were up to. So we wanted to do kind of a big format because I personally don't like to see a gutter in a map. And so this 12 by 12 format was born, and the American Beer Shed was a really popular map. It maps where barley and hops are grown in the United States, where yeast laboratories are. And then at the bottom, you see a table of showing other major hop growing countries. This map I'm showing you partly because it's fun, but also because it was a map that got the attention of Michael Pollan, and he tweeted something about it during our Kickstarter campaign. And it was really fascinating to see how in real time something like a tweet from a prominent food person could really garner some dollars, some interaction with the project. Undersea migration, this is a really beautiful map. It shows how several different types of fish foods migrate around the Pacific Ocean and the Southern Pacific Ocean. And I'm going to lean in here because, there's just such a great, I think it's the very first time, or the very first sentence. There's such a great line here that I just fell in love with. The first sentence: throughout time, human curiosity concerning travel patterns of the creatures of the ocean has focused on how best to find the most delicious ones and eat them. So I just love that. I also wanted to show this map because we invited this map to appear also in our next atlas on water. And it kind of illustrates how a theme can, a map on a theme and the broad scope of our themes can transcend into other works. We also really like to show off people's different interpretations of the cartographic arts, how they think of maps, how they think about the art of cartography. And this is a really great map done by two non-cartographers, non-geographers. These gentlemen are actually stage set designers. And this map uses a transect across the middle of a dinner plate to show where the sources of this main course, Montaña, Montaña y Mar, basically what we think of in the United States as surf and turf, the mountain and sea dish that is really popular in this town of Mugaritz. And I'm sorry, this is Portugal, right? The Basque Country of Spain. I knew I was on the Iberian Peninsula. And I just think this is a really beautiful representation, incorporating art with the transect as a map. So then we got this idea that we could keep doing this. It was a really big success. We printed 1,500 volumes and sold them all. And so we decided to make another atlas, and we decided to make it easier to deal with actually getting $30,000-ish from Kickstarter and dealing with the tax ramifications of that if we became a 401c3. So that's what we did in between these two atlases. And then we announced Water and Atlas. And this atlas we hoped would also come along in a really short amount of time, like we were able to pull off food, but unforeseen circumstances, actually very personal to me within my family, and also some kind of technical stuff with setting up the 401c3 actually prevented us from doing this very fast. And it took more than a year, more than 2 years. It took quite a bit of time to actually get this atlas out. We can look at some maps here. This atlas actually ended up being larger. I think there's 73 maps in the food atlas, and this atlas came in with even more than that. Defending Sacred Waters, the Dakota Access Pipeline in context. And this is a map that Molly Roy, who I mentioned earlier, had been one of my students and had helped found Guerrilla Cartography. She was no longer a student, but moved into a freelance cartography career. I'm sure some of you know Molly Roy and her work. And this map talks about the Dakota Access Pipeline, some of the actions, some of the important dates that surround the protests there, and also in the body of the main text block, sort of a history of the Sioux Native peoples' sort of ongoing and constant fight for their land as it was being, I will use the word, ravaged by the US government. It was work like this. I'm not going to attribute it exactly to this map because that would be silly, but it's work like this and the collective work of the protesters and people talking about these issues that eventually led to the Dakota Access Pipeline being canceled. We also like to see cartography taken beyond what we might call the real world or empirical data, and using our imaginations to imagine what the world could be or what the world might be. And this is kind of this is a fantasy map imagining water tensions in North America in the year 2028. It's pretty interesting and a little tongue-in-cheek, I guess, but it's a way to think about geography in terms that aren't quite as so empirical, that so many of us in this field are used to doing and so often, too often, forced to do by virtue of the jobs we hold. Locating Atlantis. This is one map of a 2-page spread, and it imagines where Atlantis might be, and the symbols are graduated to represent the magnitude or the volume of the number of myths or stories of lore that describe Atlantis being in one place or another. And it's just a beautiful illustration too. We really want to focus, we really have a focus of allowing cartographers to express their aesthetic in their way. We do not want an atlas that has a color book and a design style that every map conforms to. Personally, I find it very hard to read an atlas like that because I keep attributing this color to something I saw a page or two before. And so having every single map have bear the cartographers and the researchers and the designers' own aesthetic is really important to us. I feel like I've been really long-winded talking about the history of guerrilla cartography, but just wanted to let you know where we come from and what we're up to. And finally, before I give it back to Sydney to talk about Atlas in a Day, our shelter atlas, which makes a trilogy of food, water, and shelter, is currently in production, near the end of production. We have collected several dozen maps and will be publishing that later this year. We expect that our Kickstarter campaign for the funding of shelter is launching concurrently with NACIS, which would be in mid-October. You're hearing me in mid-October, even though this was recorded a few days ago. So look for our Shelter Atlas Kickstarter. Look for us on social medias. Join our newsletter email list, and you can find out about that. And maybe for this special crowd, throw together a shelter map that's 12 by 12 and be prepared to take a little bit of editing suggestions, and we might very probably, super likely, get your map into the Shelter Atlas still. So thank you all again for being here. I'm giving it back to Sydney.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darin. So I think it's really important that we, started with some of that background, because the Atlas in a Day event really came together as an effort for us to really get back to that zeitgeist that the Food Atlas was kind of premised upon, which was, doing something radically different from a long traditional publishing model. Water obviously had a lot of, unique publishing characteristics to it, but it did take us a little bit longer than we had originally planned. So we got together in 2019 and started brainstorming some ways that we could really harken back to some of our, quick disruptive mapping practices. We had been doing a lot of workshops in the community, working with some other nonprofits on some mapping as well. But really felt like there was just something else that we could do. And we came up with this idea of Atlas in a Day, with the premise being starting at, Friday night and not giving the theme away until the 24-hour countdown begins, and putting a call out to anyone in the world who's interested to contribute a map for this project within 24 hours. And so what we ended up doing was, for migration, on October 5th, we had an announcement just the night before, where we went on Facebook Live and we told our followers, we're going to be starting this project and the theme of the Atlas will be migration. So over that night, we started receiving some maps, and the next day we ended up meeting up in a location in Oakland, where we invited folks to come map with us and also listen in on a speaker series. The whole event in person took up pretty much the whole day. We had around 50 people participating, both in person and remotely. And the remote attendees were from all over the globe. We had people in New Zealand, Argentina, Mexico, and there were folks who were watching the speaker series online and tuning in to get tips on everything from data mining to ethics and how you portray, communities and places online. And then we also had food catered by our own members. I think one thing that's really important to emphasize in terms of how this came together is that we are a small entirely volunteer run organization. So costs had to be pretty limited. And so we really relied on our local community here in Oakland when we selected a location. We were very fortunate that there was a venue that provided discounts for local nonprofits. They hooked us up with a great spot. And we had people within our own board and kind of network who were willing to contribute things like lunch or even just volunteering their time to lead some of these speaking talks as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of the maps that came out of this first event. And we can talk a little bit more about how this evolved too. So this was submitted by Lindsay Decker from Denver, Colorado, who was not one of our in-person participants, but was tuning along online with us. And you can see here that there is a pattern where she's basically displaying the migration of these monarch butterflies from the south to the north by the size change of the butterflies. And I mean, this is just beautiful, regardless of the story that's being told, and really kind of emphasize kind of a mixed medium approach that we were really going for with this Atlas project. This is another map that was submitted. As you can see, you know, we really told folks we want to see just whatever you think you can do within these 24 hours. So this is actually a map of a gate crossing. And this map was featured in the NACIS Cartographic Perspectives Journal. So we'll drop a link if you want more info about how this came together as well. So I'm moving along here. So this event, I mean, we were pretty, I don't want to say surprised, but really blown away by just how it all came together. We were able to put together a PDF of the entire migration atlas at the end of the day, get it printed within the next few weeks and shipped out to the people who contributed. And we got a ton of great feedback. Folks said they wanted to see more for it. So, you know, this was on our minds at the end of 2019, thinking about, you know, what will our new Atlas in a Day project be? When should it be? And of course, as we discovered in 2020, the world changed and we found ourselves mostly at home, sheltering in place, really separated from our communities that we had been a part of up until that point. And so by around spring, you know, we had obviously had to put some of these plans on hold. But we really felt like this was maybe a good opportunity to reach out to our guerrilla cartographers, provide a way for everyone to get in touch again, and, you know, just offer a place for people to connect, map together, and be in community. And that ended up being the theme of our second Atlas in a Day event, which was announced similarly at the top of the 24-hour the top of the 24-hour timeline that we were giving our audience. And the difference with this was obviously we didn't have an in-person component, so we had to adapt our whole presentation and schedule for online. And thankfully, we had some folks on our board who were already kind of getting up to speed on that with their own work, you know, as teachers, as professors, within our own lives. So we really kind of just had to pick and pull from all the different you know, ideas that people were having as we were all adjusting to this remote world. And it really just turned out pretty incredible. So within the 24 hours that we started collecting maps, one of the first maps that we received overnight, actually I woke up to, was this map by one of our cartographers who was based in New Zealand. And this is actually a map that he made, I believe, on his bed sheet using popsicle sticks. And it's mapping out some of the Pacific Ocean and Pacific Islands near New Zealand as well, kind of looking at this cartographer's homeland and really reflecting a different kind of cartography than we would see in some of these more, you know, data-driven sort of pieces, which we also encouraged as well. And this kind of just shows the flip side to that approach, right? This is a pretty fun and straightforward map here, you can see this person was mapping out their community in a pub in London. And or in England, and so I think this really just gets at the range of the type of projects that people were sharing with us. And I think another important thing to emphasize was that between some of the virtual talks that we were doing within this 24-hour period, we had just open kind of mapping hours where we had our Zoom open and people could hop in and bounce ideas off of each other. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes it was active. We just rolled with it. And I'm going to now pass it off to Nick, who was one of our participants, and he can tell you a little bit more about his map and maybe what sort of this theme of community meant at that time for him. Nick, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sydney. And I would just like to point out that she made some very good points just about the imperative to find community and the sort of maybe punishing irony of how that theme was circulating at a time when many of us were sequestered and separated from our traditional in-person communities in life. And as the newest board member of Guerrilla Cartography, I can say that my relationship with them is very much a testament to thinking a little bit more um, uh, improvisationally about how to find community during the pandemic at a time when you are separate from your traditional in-person communities as well. So for anyone in here who still has maybe some doubts about the power of social media, I can tell you I only found out about Atlas in a Day and Guerrilla Cartography, period, just by thumbing through my Instagram feed. So Darin and Sydney, this is to let you guys know right now that yes, your Instagram generates very useful traffic for you guys. But in any case, when the theme was announced, I immediately thought to the communities I had been a part of in Chiang Mai, Thailand, for about 4 years, just prior to the pandemic. So I had lived there and only by happenstance left Thailand on February 27th, 2020, just before the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. And for those of us who were in Thailand, we were the first country to have a confirmed case of COVID outside of China. So we were all very aware of it, but we still thought it was maybe something that would blow over. Nonetheless, fast forward to May, my life in Chiang Mai had felt like it had been completely severed for me. But when the theme was announced, I wanted to go back and think about the true spirit and nature of the creative communities in the city. In a way, the city likens itself to maybe a Paris of the 1920s or a San Francisco of the 1960s, where there's a thriving, diverse, eclectic, creative community of artists, designers, performers, entrepreneurs, all trying to stake a claim and build something together. And while that's certainly true to an extent, like a lot of, quote, cosmopolitan cities today, unfortunately, there's still quite a lot of segregation. And I had found myself during the 4 years I had spent in Chiang Mai, oftentimes torn between the Thai creative community and the expat creative community. So this map, I guess you could say, was an attempt by me to rectify those differences and to try to explore where they diverged and where they converged. So on the left side of the map, if you let me break it down just really quick, is a select amount of locations and venues that were very popular with the expat community there. And then on the right side is the same, but for the Thai community. And I should disclose in advance that none of this is empirical or data driven. It kind of twists the idea of what data analysis can be on its head and attempts to do it in a very emotional way. So I'm not trying to say that just because I put something on here that was a popular place with expats, that no Thai people ever showed up, or vice versa for the Thai groups. But what I'm trying to say is that certain disparities definitely existed. And in my time there, it would be very difficult for people to go from one community to another, or to be in one community and really acknowledge that of the other. So that's what the two maps are. If you take a look at the S curve going along the map itself and kind of splitting the two maps together, you'll see too that it's divided into two lines. The bottom line is a list of the most significant people in my life who were expats. And the top line is the most significant people in my life who were Thai. And it charts when I met them. So you can see, you look really closely, it'll say it begins early 2016, goes through 2017, 2018, 2019, etc. And then the size of the dot roughly correlates to how significant they were in my own life. So for the closest people, people I lived with, one of my partners at the time, their dots are bigger. Whereas maybe other people who end up just making a little cameo in your life, as though they were there to just maybe pass off some, metaphorical plot device or something, and pass you along, send it being like a, one of the angels that comes through in your life, they may be a little bit smaller. So despite the fact that there were these discrepancies, clearly this city, in a way, two cities in one for me, is very, very important and still holds a lot of meaning to me, even though I've been away from it now for almost 2 years. And I think for me, this was more about working through my own stuff, which came out. Remember, Atlas in a Day was released just before the murder of George Floyd. And I think a lot of people were trying to reckon with what communities mean, what your defined group is, or what it stands for. And a lot of the issues that I was personally going through this map were also then reverberated through these communities in Chiang Mai, particularly that summer after George Floyd's murder and the start of the BLM protests, despite being half a world away. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you, Darin and Sydney, for inviting here today to speak. And again, I just want to iterate that having a theme like this was very timely, and I think very therapeutic for many of the people involved in guerrilla cartography, which in a sense is the whole idea of the group as a whole. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I've seen this map that you did, at this point, dozens of times probably, but every time you talk about it, I feel like I learn more and more. And that's one of the most awesome things I think about this project is many of the maps, just have such a personal connection. And, there's folks who have never made a map before in their life that are participating in this, and some expert, long tenured GIS pros. And I really think that this example in particular kind of really gets to the heart of what we were trying to achieve. So with that, we wanted to just end with a couple of reminders. Darin mentioned already our upcoming crowdfunding campaign for shelter. Please feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in contributing to the Atlas itself. But also we really look forward to your support for us getting this to the finish line and getting it funded. The other thing that's really important to us is we make sure that all of our atlases are free to download on our website. You can get the full PDF of any of our projects. You can also buy a hard copy, which we fully endorse and encourage as well. And we do donate a portion of our atlases to schools and libraries as well. So any of your donations help us continue to do that. as well as just enable us to do these kind of activities in between. Here's all of our info. Feel free to reach out. We'll be on Slack as well, sharing some of the links to what we shared today. And otherwise, thank you all so much. Looking forward to seeing your maps.